Bonjour et bienvenue à un nouvel épisode du podcast du MR21, ici à la cathédrale Notre-Dame de l'Assomption. Dans cette série, on reçoit des invités spéciaux pour discuter de différents sujets qui touchent le patrimoine du bâtiment ici et l'œuvre du musée aussi. Alors, mon nom c'est André Bourgeois et je suis l'animateur de cette série. Aujourd'hui, on accueille deux invités spéciaux de Place Resurgo. On a Lawren Campbell et Sophie Auffrey. Alors, Lawren Campbell est né à Moncton. Il détient des diplômes en anglais et en art dramatique. Il a été registraire municipal des lieux patrimoniaux de Moncton avant d'être registraire provincial pour le Nouveau-Brunswick pendant 6 ans et demi. Dans son poste actuel en tant que coordonnateur du patrimoine et culture pour la ville de Moncton, ses responsabilités comprennent le rôle de personne ressource pour le comité de la conservation du patrimoine de Moncton. Il est également acteur professionnel et cinéaste indépendant. Sophie Auffrey, acadienne née à Dieppe et titulaire d'une maîtrise en muséologie de l'Université de Montréal, d'une expérience de travail et d'apprentissage à l'étranger au Musée national d'Irlande et à l'École du Louvre, ainsi que des diplômes en arts visuels et en éducation. Dans son poste actuel en tant qu'agente de développement du patrimoine pour la ville de Moncton, elle est responsable des relations communautaires pour le musée de la place Resurgo. Sophie, Lawren, bienvenue. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Merci, pleasure. Thanks for thinking of us.
So the topic today is location, l'emplacement de la cathédrale Notre-Dame de l'Assomption. La cathédrale a été bâtie en 1939-40, puis à l'époque, c'était de loin le plus haut bâtiment du centre-ville de Moncton, de toute la ville de Moncton en fait. C'est un bâtiment vraiment audacieux pour l'époque, mais c'est pas sur la rue Main qu'elle a été construite. It was built right here on St. George Street. So, what was St. George Street like at that time? À quoi ça ressemblait?
Fait que dans la première moitié du 20e siècle, Saint-Georges, il y avait quand même beaucoup de vie. Il y avait plusieurs commerces, plusieurs résidences. Des choses comme on disait l'autre jour, c'était pas vraiment du destination shopping, mais plus des commerces du quotidien. Fait qu'il y avait des garagistes, il y avait des barbiers, il y avait des épiceries, des églises, des restaurants, des
Laundromats.
oui, des buanderies, un horloger, des affaires comme ça qu'on avait besoin pour tous les jours parce que justement, il y avait beaucoup de résidents dans le quartier, dans le temps.
Alors, c'était peut-être comme un petit downtown pour le quartier ou?
Je sais pas si c'était downtown, mais plutôt comme
It was actually, I would consider it more of a suburb to the downtown. Leading up in the first half of the 20th century, the railway was installed down at the railway yards off of Main Street, down by where the train station is now. And it was the headquarters for the Intercolonial Railway, so it had all the shops, les ateliers, all the big buildings. They all burnt down in still one of the biggest fires in Moncton's history in 1906, burnt down. And politics were at play at the time, so the person that was running for re-election heard that the railway wanted to move the shops and their headquarters from Moncton to Montreal. And one of his campaign promises was to ensure that the shops stayed in Moncton. So they did stay in Moncton, and within a year they start building on John Street, where Emerson Park is now, where Millennium cuts through.
Yeah.
That's where the shops eventually reinstalled and stayed there until the 80s. So by the 1950s, half the population of Moncton works in some way with the railway. Mm-hmm. So where are they all going to live? They're going to walk to work if they can. So that's how that whole section around Victoria Park, John Street, they're railway people that wanted to walk to work. But they also live as well. So instead of walking all the way down to Main Street, St. George was a nice little sort of cutoff point. I don't have to go all the way to Main Street to buy my meat, to buy my groceries. Let's develop St. George Street.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the cathedral has been here since the late 30s. Are there any other buildings on the street that have been here for a long time, important buildings?
Yeah, a few. A lot of them have been made over, but it really was a mix of residential and commercial. So you actually find a lot of the retail places used to be houses. But something like the Moncton Fish Market,
oh, yeah.
It's been there for decades, but it's been, I think, more than 100 years on St. George. It started at another location, then moved to where it is now, and has been there, I think, since the 40s, 46 or something like that.
It started ça a commencé en 1917, je pense, à son premier emplacement, puis là, ça a déménagé juste en avant de la cathédrale.
On ouvre la porte, ils sont devant nous.
Oui.
Right, so not a big building, but an important fixture in Moncton's economic landscape, right?
En termes de bâtiments comme quand même assez importants qui étaient déjà là dans le temps, si on regarde, on va plus vers l'ouest, puis on vient par ici, il y a le bâtiment Doyle, qui était dans le temps une épicerie, puis un commerce de chaussures par un papa et un fils, je pense, qui est aujourd'hui où se trouve le Epoch Chemistry. Fait que ça, c'était
So
déjà
right beside the Jean
Yeah.
Coutu parking lot right there. So that building's 1904.
Yeah.
So
Puis là, si on continue, là, il y a l'église, là, le First Baptist. C'est-tu le First Baptist?
Au coin de la Highfield?
the Highfield Street
United
Baptist Church. Yeah. So that's built in early 20s, I believe, but replaced another wooden church on the same site, which is pretty much the same for all the churches, with a few exceptions. But a wooden church they tore down to expand into something brick or stone, or it burnt down. Everything burnt down in 1914 to 1916.
Yeah.
I think they built with kindling and matches. I'm not sure, but every school, every church burnt down at some point or another during that period. Yeah.
On a vu dans le livre de Régis Brun, Les Acadiens à Moncton, lui a répertorié beaucoup d'adresses des Acadiens du début du 20e siècle, et beaucoup de ces adresses-là étaient sur les rues Robinson, Lutz et Archibald, toutes les rues juste ici autour de la cathédrale. Est-ce que c'est une coïncidence? Est-ce qu'il y avait un genre une concentration vraiment ici dans le quartier?
C'est intéressant que tu dis ça parce qu'on était en train de passer dans le livre, le répertoire. Puis à tous les comme 3-4 noms anglophones, il y avait un nom acadien. Puis c'était tellement le fun de voir, là. Puis des fois, justement, Robinson, là, il y avait plusieurs noms acadiens. Ben, on parlait de ça. On ne sait pas si c'était une coïncidence, mais c'est que la population était vraiment divisée. C'était quasiment 50-50 en termes d'anglophones puis francophones dans le temps. Fait que c'était juste très mélangé.
Because you had Dieppe, there weren't really parts of Moncton that were, that's the French part or the Acadian part of Moncton. But there certainly were more Anglophone parts of Moncton, if that makes any sense. So it's either Anglophone or a mix. And the Anglophone ones, as we said, you have to acknowledge the economic status of Acadians in the 30s, 40s, 50s. They couldn't afford Upper Cameron.
Ben, c'est ça.
You know, so you are going to get that mix, but sometimes you see developments of these new sort of higher-end suburb-type neighborhoods, and most of the names at that time were Anglophone.
Ouais. Si tu penses à Victoria Park, là, dans cette région-là, là, c'est beaucoup plus anglophone. Là. C'était pas des maisons qu'on pouvait afforder, si tu veux.
Well, what's interesting, because again, everything around Victoria Park developed largely because of the shops on John Street. A lot of the laborers are Francophone. You'd expect all the names to be French. But what you actually see is who built these houses. Anglophones that worked for the railway, for the most part, built these houses. But a lot of them were duplexes, so they'd live in one, and the transient name of workers on the other half were primarily Francophone names as they went through. So, yes, economically and social status speaking, Anglophones were doing better at that time, but because of that, they created environments, residential environments, where they could easily rent half a house or to work for a year or 2 years or what have you.
Il y a aussi le fait que la congrégation était déjà ici. Je ne sais pas si peut-être que les gens voulaient se rapprocher de leur église ou de leur paroisse. C'est ça. C'est comme,
you certainly see that with the Jewish community, because the Jewish community was not very large in the 20s when they came over and they stayed near Stedman and created their synagogue, and they physically stayed there. That's primarily because they had to walk to synagogue. They weren't allowed to drive. So they had to live close enough so that they weren't walking 8 miles to get to church. Didn't happen as much with Francophone or Anglophone because, well, certainly not Anglophone because there were enough Anglophone churches. There was one nearby no matter where you lived. But French churches, there just weren't that many. So kind of central to have it here, but to afford something closer to downtown for a not so rich congregation. So I'm going to grab this because I want to show you where we sit now, and people my age, older, don't consider this outskirts. It still kind of feels, okay, I'm downtown. It was not downtown. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay, so right here, okay, is basically the end of houses, right? That's the Thomas Williams house.
Oh, wow.
Au coin de la Park et la Highfield.
So that's about as outskirted, and we're around the corner from the Thomas Williams house right here. So the little steeple that you see down here is Highfield United Baptist Church. It's farmland behind it. It's literally the middle of nowhere. So until 1906, and this little spot right here starts to develop and become that John Street, Victoria Park area, that's the only way you get St. George, that section of St. George Street to start developing. So to pick this as the first congregation in the early teens, I think, is where...
Yeah, 1917, I think.
Yeah. For the Congregation notre-dame de l'Assomption. And they had a beautiful design for a fantastic looking church that they only ever managed to get the front archways and part of the foundation and the crypts and stuff. Yeah. And they had the top boarded off, and people remember going to church, getting married, having funerals in the basement of this unfinished church that never ever got finished. So when the Holy See, when this becomes an archdiocese in the 30s, archdioceses need a cathedral. So where do you tear down and build somewhere else? No, the foundations were here, the crypts were here. They built on the same location. So the reason that the cathedral is here was the pre-existing congregation. Why was that congregation here? Because they could only afford to be way out in the middle of nowhere, because they couldn't afford where the other nice big churches, the Anglophone, the Anglican and churches were. So those are some of the reasons. It's real estate, it's socioeconomic. The reason the church didn't get finished, they never had enough money at any point to finish that church. So those are the realities that caused the location where we're sitting today.
Yeah, and this was the first Francophone church in Moncton, the first Catholic church. They used to go to St. Bernard's before that.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
There was the Saint-Anselme Church had already been open for a while. So that, a lot of people here in the Catholic community, they see the Saint-Anselme Church, it's dear to their hearts because it's kind of the oldest one in the area, the Francophone one. Bon, l'édifice de la Maison du Commerce, à côté, construit en 1955, vraiment juste à côté de la cathédrale, c'était l'ancien édifice L'Assomption. Alors, Assomption-Vie a depuis aménagé dans le grand immeuble Place L'Assomption, sur la rue Maine, qui est comme, on le voit de partout. Est-ce que c'est une coïncidence que leurs anciens bureaux étaient d'abord construits juste à côté de la cathédrale Notre-Dame de l'Assomption?
Non.
C'était stratégique au bout. Là.
Okay. Yeah.
Fait qu'on a essayé de décortiquer un petit peu le début de tout ça. Il y a un organisme qui s'appelait Société L'Assomption, qui a commencé en 1903 au Massachusetts. Puis leur mandat, c'était l'éducation et le soutien pour les Acadiens aux États-Unis et au Canada. Fait que c'est eux qui sont venus ici construire l'édifice. Dans l'édifice, il y avait des espaces disponibles pour d'autres commerces, pour louer. Fait qu'Assomption Vie, de ça j'ai compris, la compagnie d'assurance a vu ça comme une opportunité pour justement se rapprocher à sa clientèle. Visée, fait qu'ils se sont installés dans l'édifice.
Yeah, it's a little complicated, and it's almost like one organization gave birth to the other organization, which got so big it took on the first organization.
Chicken and the egg, là.
So it started as Société L'Assomption, as this sort of educational and financial kind of aid endowment kind of society for the U.S. and Canada, and only a few years, this is what I discovered, is only a few years later they started issuing insurance for Acadians as part of their membership. Well, insurance is a pretty hot industry to be in, so that grew and became L'Assomption Vie. So pretty strategic as a group, but I think that was sort of their thing from the beginning. Is we're not just a fraternity or a not-for-profit that's there to kind of support. They wanted to really support concretely.
Oui, c'était vraiment bien pensé. Puis ils existaient déjà, comme qu'on a dit, au Massachusetts, avec le nom Assomption. Fait que ça aussi, c'est un peu d'une coïncidence, mais ça fait aussi du sens parce que pour les Acadiens, le mot Assomption, la référence biblique a tellement une signification importante. Mm-hmm. Fait que ils se sont pas nommés à cause de la cathédrale, mais ça donne qu'ils sont voisins. Ben, c'était une stratégie aussi.
Well, what does the cathedral, what does it signify? I mean, it's a beacon for the spiritual lives of Acadians. So you have an institution that's taking care of the financial and education side. It should be in the same place. So it kind of made logical sense that they would build something pretty close and create almost this Acadian cultural hub that covers all facets of Acadian life.
La construction de la cathédrale a certainement mobilisé beaucoup de gens, beaucoup de ressources. Savez-vous qu'est-ce qu'il y avait dans l'air dans le quartier à l'époque? S'il y avait un stir, est-ce qu'il y avait des cafés? Où est-ce que les gens mangeaient, dormaient, socialisaient?
Oof.
We tried to figure that out, and that's a hard one because no one has really written that story.
It's a story to write, though. C'est intéressant de savoir où est-ce que les gens se rassemblaient, tu sais.
The higher end skilled laborers would have been, a lot of them would have come from elsewhere, but most of the laborers would have been local.
Oui.
You've seen the video of this, the film converted to video of the construction of the cathedral. Yeah. The amount of people working with their hands to build this, everything from wheelbarrows full of concrete going up rickety ramps or hoisting the cross up with pulleys, and the amount of manpower. You're right, there had to have been a surge of some kind.
C'est sûr que ça a attiré du monde, mais il y avait beaucoup qui venaient d'ici.
They were already here.
Yeah.
I imagine some people were tradespeople from the railway that were doing this because they belonged to the congregation and wanted to do it. Yeah, exactly. The amount of labor, it would have been a positive boost. Think about the years that this was built. 39, 40. Yeah. What are you coming out of?
Second Depression.
Great Depression
and World War.
and before the war. So quite a nice boom, but we saw it relatively recently during recessions that we've had. The federal government finds it's their job to throw money at projects. So what happened during the Great Depression here? You get the federal building, post office down on Highfield Street. You get Moncton High School, the most advanced high school in the Dominion of Canada when it was built. When everybody's broke during, but what did it do? It showed the world and the citizens were still strong, we're still moving forward, but it also employed a lot of people. These projects were big. So this isn't quite depression, but boy, pretty close. You're not in full recovery by the time this project rolled around. So pretty important project.
Lawren, Sophie, you've really helped us get new perspective on this location. Alors, merci beaucoup de nous avoir rejoints. Puis c'est vraiment un plaisir de travailler avec vous.
Ben, merci à toi, André.
Absolute pleasure.
Ouais.
Yeah, thank you.